Good morning. Welcome to the Fairways Show. This morning, my guest is Jim Byers, who had a long career with the Toronto Star and more recently has written a very interesting travel blog called Jim Byers Travel. I've been following it for a number of years, and Jim always gets to lots of interesting spots. And most recently, he's, I guess appropriately, started a series called The Future of Travel. So welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Peter. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good seeing you. As I think I've started every show for the last few weeks, it's like we're living in interesting times, and
yes.
I don't know if there's anything approaching normal or the new normal even yet. So,
Not for a while.
what's your take on this? What has this meant to you?
Well, it's as a travel writer, obviously, puts a little bit of a crimp in your style. It's like a golf writer who can't play golf. You can at least talk about other things, and there are other things to talk about in the industry besides just destinations. So I've had to switch gears a little bit, and we're all adapting. Pivot is kind of the new buzzword for businesses. You're doing your blog, and you're doing your surveys here, and your seminars, and talking to people online and doing our Zoom chat. So that's something that you're doing. And I thought, well, if I can't write about destinations, maybe I can tailor my own blog more to things that are going on in the industry. So I suddenly thought, there's all these stories out there about the future of travel. So I guess about a month ago, I just thought, okay, every day, well, I usually take Sundays off, but pretty much every day, I'll go through all of the headlines, because I noticed nobody was really kind of doing a compendium sort of thing, Peter. Like I saw stories over here. CNN is writing about this, or CBC is writing about that, or the Globe and Mail's got a story on this, but I hadn't seen anybody kind of pulling everything all together into one kind of general spot where people who are interested in travel could go down and, chunks of little bits of information, 6 or 7 different things. I try to bring in stuff from around the world, updates, have a little bit of fun with it. I've never been a capital S serious kind of writer. I try to have a kind of a fun, engaging style, and have a little bit of a good time with some of these things. Not easy to do when you're talking about layoffs, but at least now, we're starting to see some things open up a little bit. Italy's opening up soon, Spain, St. Lucia. We could talk about St. Lucia later, because that's going to be an increasingly great golf destination with the guys from Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs opening up a course down there in the next couple of years. So, we're all adapting. It is strange to not travel, but hey, it's at least it's May. It's the weather's nice. I can get out and cycle. I can explore my own neighborhood, and much better to be grounded now than January.
For sure. The golf industry has recently reopened, and it came without much warning, particularly here in Ontario. Premier Ford had shut everything down, and I think he gave a warning that they might be opening soon, and then 2 days before they actually opened, he said, "Okay, go on Saturday."
Yeah.
And
nothing like giving the greenskeepers plenty of time to get the course ready.
Well, I think most of them had probably been working pretty hard anticipating that was going to happen, but for golfers and for the operators themselves, they were caught a little bit off guard. Right now, as I understand it, there's a travel ban on until June 21st.
Yeah, June 21st, June 23rd, depends on which site you read. I saw 23rd today, but I don't know if that's true. But it's very strange, Peter, because there appears to be a rather severe gap in this travel ban, because air travel is legal. Now, I don't understand this in any way, shape, or form. How you can have a closed border but allow flights. I've talked to people who have friends who've been flying back and forth between Canada and the US on occasion. I think you're supposed to undergo a quarantine, but there's nobody enforcing it the way they are in some other parts of the world. So it's very strange. And then I saw something this morning that said that it's allowed if you go by boat, but not scheduled ferry, rail. So I guess via rail or Amtrak in the US, or that you can fly. So it's a very strange closed border. I don't really understand the way it's working, but I'm certainly not going anywhere. My dad's in California where I grew up. I'm not going anywhere until the border is officially open.
the fact that the border is somewhat closed at the moment anyway, certainly to a lot of passenger or car traffic, I guess, is going to have, if it's not already having, some severe implications for the tourism industry here in Canada. What are you hearing about that? What do you take?
It's been dreadful, and there really hasn't been. There's been overall help from the Trudeau government. I think by and large the government's done a pretty good job, as has Doug Ford. Been a bit surprising given his past, but he's been quite good most of the time. Trudeau's been pretty good, but there really hasn't been anything aimed specifically at the tourism sector, at least that I've seen. Hotel industry obviously is just devastated. 5 to 8, 10% occupancy on a good day. It's getting better in the U.S. I saw a quote today from chairman of Wyndham Hotels in the U.S. saying that the last few days, now maybe it's the Memorial Day weekend bump, but they were at 50% for some of their mid-scale, mid-range kind of properties. So there is some, hope on the horizon there. But in Canada, it's been terrible. There have been no programs specifically aimed at the airline industry, which is a huge generator and kind of knits the country together, if you believe the airlines anyway. And that's a hard thing to do because, if you help, one thing to help Transat or Sunwing, but Air Canada went into this situation, Peter, with I think $6 billion in assets. So it's kind of hard to bail out Air Canada and treat them the same way. And I think one of the reasons we've seen a delay in help for the tourism industry is that they're not quite sure who to help and how to help them and how to make it work fair. I think it's a lot easier to work with the General Motors or to work with just industries as a whole. But the tourism industry can be a tough one. And now, of course, it's a different situation in British Columbia because they're starting to open up a little bit in BC, and in Ontario and Quebec, I don't know if we're going backwards, but we sure ain't moving forward.
The airlines seem to be like the proverbial old house. It's just they keep pouring money into it
Right.
forever, and with the proposed or let's call them the discussed
Right.
guidelines going forward. I don't know that anything's been actually carved in stone yet, but they're going to fly at 50 or 60% capacity. They're looking at modifying seats and putting in plastic dividers and all kinds of things. It's like, can the airlines survive in any form flying at 50% capacity?
No, it's simply not possible. I saw one study that said even if they, and I don't know what the economics are, I'm not that smart. Even if they flew at 2/3 capacity, they don't really make any money. And don't forget airfares are also, we can talk about this later, but airfares are going to be going up too, folks. So anybody who's gotten used to $600 or $500 trips to Vancouver from Toronto, it ain't happening in the future because you can't operate a plane at 30% less capacity or 40% less capacity without raising your airfares. But no, they can't really go on for that long at 50 or 60%, Peter. They've all brought in different programs. I haven't seen a lot from some of the other Canadian airlines. Air Canada, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, brought in something called Clean Care Plus. And it's a program where everybody that comes on board is given, first of all, they don't physically block off the seats, but they're leaving a seat empty next to everyone on the plane, unless it's your spouse or someone you want to sit next to, then you can, your children. But generally speaking, there's an empty seat next to everyone on the plane. But when you come in, you're given a package with a mask, hand sanitizer, wipes, gloves, bottle of water, because they're not walking up and down the aisles serving drinks anymore, and then a prepackaged meal. So it's not just helter skelter anymore. I haven't seen it yet. Ryanair in England or in the UK, in Europe, is talking about making people raise their hands to use the bathroom because they don't want big lineups in the aisleway.
Sure.
So it's not quite the romance of travel that maybe we got used to. And that wasn't very romantic compared to 20 or 30 years ago anyway. So it's going to be a very strange experience, I think, for all of us the first time we go through that airport. Obviously, there's social distancing rules at the airport. There's different check-in policies. There's talk of bags being sprayed. I saw where there's a prototype in Hong Kong of a little machine or a little box you would actually step into and get sprayed with sanitizer. I'm like, I'm not sure I really want to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get sick either. So It's going to be crazy. It's going to be a long time. You know, Air Canada's chairman, president, Kalen Rovanescu, said the other day, he said 3 years, at best, before we get back to 2019 level.
Normally we might be excited about maybe lower airfares, given that the price of oil is way down and their fuel costs are off, but obviously that's offset by not flying at full capacity and lots of other costs that are going to be associated with the coronavirus. Right.
Yeah, there's an interesting one that I'm writing about on my blog now. Actually, it's called. This is a new buzzword that I'm really intrigued by. This. It's called. Depends on what phrase you want to use. A travel bubble or an air bridge. So basically, what this is an agreement between two countries that haven't had big problems to say, okay, we're not going to allow everybody in, but you're okay. You can come on in. So Australia and New Zealand have talked about this because they both handle things pretty well, especially New Zealand, from what I've seen. Very low death rates in New Zealand, and a great prime minister, by the way. I love that lady. She's really cool. So they're talking about something, and those countries have always been close anyway. So they might say, okay, we will allow Australia and New Zealand. We'll go back and forth because we're pretty sure about you guys. There's one in the Baltic countries called the Baltic bubble that I just read about today. I guess Latvia, Estonia, and forgive me, I can't remember, Lithuania. Sorry, there you go. Travel writers got to know those. That they're going to allow travel within those three. England's tourism minister or somebody in the British Parliament raised this yesterday, or I think so, talking about maybe they could do something with Portugal so that all the Brits who want to have their summer holidays on the beach can go to the Algarve and play a little golf and get some sun. So travel bubble and air bridges are kind of the new buzzwords that are popped up in travel the last couple of days. And maybe it's something Canada could do. I don't think we want to do it right now with New York City, no offense, and maybe not anywhere in the US, but perhaps with New Zealand and Australia, perhaps with Germany. I don't know, maybe Canada ultimately could look at some of these countries and extend special privileges and say, okay, other people are going to have a quarantine, but you guys are coming from a pretty safe environment, you can come on in. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I certainly don't want to go all political on this, but I hesitate to think what somebody like Donald Trump could do with this. Is you'd have reverse air bubbles or bridges.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. He's already got bans on, so.
Yes, yeah, I know.
Yeah. In one of your most recent blogs, you talked about Canadian tourism industry could fall as much as 60%. How much of that could maybe be offset by the fact that people are presumably going to stay home more this year? They're going to be looking for local travel, places that they can drive to. And do local travelers impact the economy as much as foreign visitors?
Not even close.
No?
I don't have the figures in front of me, Peter, but in past conversations I've had with Tourism Toronto folks, an international traveler stays longer and they spend a great deal more. Let's face it, if you or I are driving downtown to go to a Jays game, if there ever is one again, we might drop $25 on a parking spot and maybe we go for a couple of beers and a burger somewhere and then we kind of drive home. Let's say we even spend a weekend. We might go down and we'll go for a couple days, but we're not going for a week. We're not going for 10 days. Somebody who comes from China doesn't pop in for the weekend. They go to Vancouver and maybe to Vancouver Island, maybe Toronto, Niagara Falls, perhaps Montreal, Ottawa, Quebec. Japanese travelers for sure have been flocking to Prince Edward Island, as you know, for years for Anna Green Gables and such. So I don't have the numbers, but I think an international traveler is worth at least double and maybe even more what a local traveler would be. That having been said, if you're running a lodge in the Kawarthas or Muskoka or Niagara, you're happy to have anybody at this point. So
sure.
I think that's local will be just about all we're going to be able to do. And here in Ontario, that's not even happening really for a couple of weeks. I haven't heard really of any tourism boards or doing any trips. I haven't heard of any hotels really being. I mean, they're open, but if you can't really eat at the restaurant, what's the point of driving to Windsor or Ottawa or Kingston if you're just going to sit in your hotel and turn around and go home?
Yeah, for sure.
That's crazy. You know, one story that I did the other day that you probably wouldn't have seen because I didn't post it on my blog was about RV travel. I did that for AARP, American Association of Retired People, based in the U.S. And it was all about ins and outs, kind of renting a motorhome or an RV of some sort. You know, seems like a great way to do it. You know, as I was telling somebody, you know, you're in charge. You're in charge of the Windex bottle, right? So that place is going to be as clean as you want it to be. And if you're driving somewhere and you pull into a campground and, you know, there's yahoos and they're not wearing their masks or they're not practicing what you think are the right social distance rules, you just pull in and go to the next one. Or stop at a Walmart parking lot and bunk down there for the night. But, you know, you don't have to pay for anything. It's not always a cheap vacation. By the time you pay for the gas, and sometimes there's mileage and the campground fees, but, you know, you can make your own meals, so that's handy. And you're kind of in charge and you go where you want to go. And like I say, you're the one with the lights off. And you can make that as clean as you want to be, and you don't have to worry about interacting with, you know, hotel workers or a bellman or anything like that. So I think RVs could be pretty popular across Canada this summer.
RVs were, I mean, they had their kind of moment in time a number of years ago, and then they fell out of favor. I guess partly because of the high fuel costs, and
I think so,
partly because of the cheapness of airfares that, you know, people could just fly over all those destinations and get where they wanted to go.
Not doing that now, yeah.
But do you see that RV travel and I guess by extension campers and you know, all of that could become a bigger part of whatever the new normal is, or
certainly in the short term? Yeah, I think so. In the short term, Peter, I've seen various stats, and you can never really, I mean, no offense, but I'm not sure I can always rely on industry people to give me the truth. Oh, sales are crazy, you know, it's not, they're up 600%, you know, and I'm like, well, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. But I've seen a lot of people saying the interest is up quite a bit. They are getting more reservations. It kind of stands to reason, you know. I'm a big believer in these things, that those things that kind of inherently make sense are usually true. And, you know, everybody around the world is talking about local travel. They're talking about national parks, provincial parks, you know, everything from Banff to Algonquin, places like that. And maybe some of the quieter ones that we don't know are certainly going to be popular. You know, we are definitely blessed in Southern Ontario to have lots of places nearby that we can go to and explore. And obviously people, you know, for the most part, I think we're going to be looking for those quieter places. But obviously, you know, having seen the situation at Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto recently, you know, there's a lot of young people that want to get out there and party and get out and get to the bars and the restaurants. So I think when this is all over and we can open up things a little bit more, you know, that's going to be interesting. But, you know, how do you do that at a restaurant? You know, how many seats can you allow at a restaurant, and how do you practice social distancing with the waiter? You know, do they stand at a distance? Do they, you know, it's funny, you get a pizza, you can shove your pizza on the little pizza tray and slide it off and not get close. But I don't know how that works with, maybe you wear your mask when you're not eating. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but, you know, restaurants barely make any money as it is. And if a restaurant's only at 50% capacity, you know, how does that work? Because they've still got to pay their rent. And unless the rent is 50%, I assume that's one of their larger costs. So I'm not sure how this is all going to work. You know, it was funny. I saw, you know, because it would obviously look funny if a restaurant is always half empty or half full. I saw somewhere that there was like a Michelin star restaurant in either New York or Washington, D.C., I think D.C., and they were going to bring in mannequins. And like Home Alone, you know. Well, that was pretty funny. So, excuse me, can you pass the salt? You know, that was pretty funny. You got to laugh, right? Because it's completely crazy.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned a few destinations when you started, and I was intrigued by one of the headlines. Actually, it might have been in yesterday's blog that Japan may be subsidizing people to go there. So, I mean, they're going to pay part of your travel costs to come visit Japan.
That's what they said. Sicily apparently brought this in. I hadn't heard about it. And then Japan's tourism minister, or one of the senior ministers, mentioned it a couple days ago. And, you know, somebody was saying, is that crazy or is it clever? And I actually think it's pretty clever. Again, because, you know, you are talking about international travelers for the most part, I think is who they're aiming at. So, you know, if an international traveler is going to come in, let's say for I'll do the math off the top of my head. If an international traveler is going to come for a week, because you don't fly to Japan again for a long weekend. So let's say they're going to come for a week and they're going to spend, let's keep the math simple, $500 a day on food and entertainment, which is probably low in Japan, but let's just say that. There's like $3,500. Let's say their airfare is $2,000 from Canada. So there's like $5,500. I don't think they're going to be, Japan would pay for some of these restaurant meals, but they would pay up to half, as I understand it, for the airfare and the hotel. So if you look at it from that standpoint, looking, okay, maybe $5,500, they spend $2,750. They get another $2,750. So that's a wash. But then every restaurant meal you go out to, every attraction you go to, Tokyo Disneyland, the fish market, you take the train, the bullet train down to Kyoto for a couple of days. Anything else you do is kind of incremental spending and helps the economy. So is it a great deal for them? I don't know. But if you're running an attraction or a hotel, it may not be a bad way to do things. You know, and some of the comments I was getting on Twitter are quite valid, saying, well, there's great PR, but what if I get sick? Are they going to pay my medical bills? Well, no, I don't think so. So that's always something that you have to keep in mind. I saw something, and I think I mentioned it in the blog, Peter, that Japan's got, if I'm not mistaken, 126 million people and has had less than 900 deaths. So it's a pretty safe place to be, I think, at this point. And so it's interesting, you know. So you have a choice. I'll turn the tables here for a minute. You have a choice of going to Japan or Sicily and have part of your expenses covered. Where do you go?
Well, you know, I think you've made the point. I mean, I think I'd go to Japan, partly for safety, but also I think because they've taken a proactive approach to doing something here, and they've kind of defined the parameters of it. I mean, you know, you did the math, and you know what I guess, to extend it a little bit further, they could dump that money into a lot of different things, but by bringing visitors in, they're keeping employment higher than it otherwise would be. You know, they're generating revenue in other areas, so that's got to be good.
And they get a bit of a buzz out of it. You know, you get some PR, you get people on Instagram and social media and what have you. And I don't know, I think it's certainly worth trying. I can't see Canada, excuse me, doing something like that. I think that's a little radical for us.
Probably. Just to ask you about some of these things that have happened before. I want to get into talking about some of the destinations and some of the other stuff that you write about, but what is the story, do you think, on insurance coverage for travelers? Because I've heard lots of horror stories, but don't have any firsthand knowledge of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't either, because obviously I'm not going anywhere, so I haven't explored it on a personal basis. Everything I've read, though, it basically says you're not getting covered for COVID-19. Like, there's not an insurance company in the world right now who's going to take the risk of somebody being on a ventilator or spending days in a hospital, especially in the United States. You can imagine what the price tag would be on something like that. So from what I understand, Peter, the insurance companies are not allowing insurance for COVID-19. I guess if you wanted to give them, you know, $100,000 for a week trip, they might take it. I don't know. But to my knowledge, most of the companies aren't even offering it. So that's really something that you have to think about pretty carefully before you go anywhere, which is another reason I think that people, for the most part, will be traveling within Canada over the summer. You mentioned the price of oil and the price of gas, you know, still under $1 a liter last time I checked. And of course, the Canadian dollar is not great. I think it's about 70 cents still, hovering somewhere around there. So it's not a cheap time to go to the United States anyway. So for all of those reasons, you know, but even now, you know, there are some restrictions. PEI has told people, you know, if you're coming from Ontario or Quebec or another part of Canada to have problems, we'd like you to self-quarantine for 14 days. You know, you really want to drive to your cottage in PEI and be locked down in your house for 2 weeks, even if you've got a nice front porch and a view of the ocean? Probably not. You know, Newfoundland, I believe I don't think there's a quarantine, but I could be wrong. They did have a lot of problems early on. I did see something the other day, actually this morning, that Newfoundland tourism or Newfoundland government is giving $25 million to help the tourism industry specifically, which is good to see. You probably spent time in Newfoundland, but it's, you know, and I shouldn't pick favorites. I love BC, especially in January. But to me, Newfoundland is just God's country. They are just, they make the Irish look mean. You know, they're so nice. You know, they're just amazing people. You know,
Yeah.
and some great
Unfortunately,
golfers.
it's the one province in Canada that I have not been to, and I've been meaning to. I mean, apart from the fact that there are a few unbelievable golf courses down there.
Fantastic. Yeah.
There's some wonderful scenery, and I've heard lots of great tales of
it's
John's
fantastic.
and parties and stuff like that.
I just love Newfoundland. It's lovely.
Yeah. One thing I have had some experience with, and that's been affected by this COVID-19, is my wife and I had booked a trip to Mexico, which had to get canceled, and at first we had a fairly restrictive voucher that had to be used up fairly quickly, and now I'm told that our voucher doesn't have an expiry limit on it, and it's also transferable. So
if it's Air Canada,
a big bonus. Yeah, sorry, it was Air
Canada. Yeah, that's what they were getting a lot of heat. There have been these air rights passenger air rights groups arguing, and I understand their point that you know, somebody spent money, $2,000, whatever it might be, on an airfare to the Caribbean or Hawaii or California or BC, whatever it may be. Not their fault, but COVID-19 is certainly not their fault. They put their money in. Why should the airlines be able to keep it? It's an understandable point of view. The position that the Prime Minister and the Canadian government, Canadian Transportation Agency, has said, sure, you can get a refund if you like. Well, we understand that you might want one, but we also have to protect the airline industry. We don't want them going under because airline travel is a vital part of the country. There was, I think, some pressure for changing of policies. So last Friday, so just a few days ago, Air Canada took the policy and changed it from being a 2-year validity for the voucher, as you mentioned, Peter, to no expiry date whatsoever. So 10, 20 years from now, presumably you could take that trip. And they also said it's fully transferable because in the past they weren't allowing those to be transferred. So if you're like somebody who's, let's say, in their 80s and they're like, can't really chance it, or I don't have enough time to get off work, you can transfer that to a family member or a friend, probably donate it to charity if you wanted to. There's also something, I think they're giving out bonus Aeroplan points. I don't remember the specifics of that, but I think you can take the equivalent value and put it into Aeroplan points, which Air Canada is now controlling, and give yourself kind of a bonus for that. I'm not sure if people are going to want to do that. They might. It's attractive for a lot of folks. So they are doing a better job on that. To my knowledge, the other airlines have not matched Air Canada on that policy. So I believe the other major airlines in Canada still have the 2-year window for the vouchers, and that they are not fully transferable. If that's not correct, I apologize, but I believe that is the case.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's good news, and I suspect that the other airlines will probably have to follow suit, which probably will be a relief to a lot of people.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I would have thought they might have done so. That was Air Canada on Friday. Now it is only, a couple days later. So maybe over the course of a week, maybe there's a bit of a money that came in from the government. Maybe that's what they're waiting for, Peter, is for the government to say, okay, here's a little bit of money. But, I don't know how you give money to WestJet when it's owned by Onyx and Jerry Schwartz. So, what WestJet, I don't know about that. I think WestJet a couple years ago or a year ago would have had a better chance of getting a bailout or government assistance, because bailout, I don't like that word, would have had a better chance of getting government assistance a year ago than they would right now. So I think, again, that's kind of the problem. And it's all complicated by the Air Canada potential takeover of Transat. Transat, they had an initial offer. They then increased the offer to, I think, $18 a share. Air Transat, last I checked, was around $7 or $8 a share. So, it may not be worth what Air Canada said it was going to pay for it. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Actually, the European Commission this week, not so much a ruling, but issued a statement saying that they have some concerns over the deal, that it would lead to a little bit too strong a position by Air Canada or by the combined airline, and too many routes under their control between Europe and Canada. So that review could be, the European Commission could enforce some changes to that. plan, and as could the Canadian Transportation Agency. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. I think there's still a few more months to go on that.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit
Yeah.
and talk to you a little bit about some actual travel.
Oh, that's a little more fun.
Yeah, one of the things that I mean, I get to do some neat trips from time to time. I'm invited to, go to a destination, and we always stay in the best accommodations and play the best golf courses, and we get to eat in the best spots.
Cool.
And I'm sure you do too, and it's one of the perks of what we do. But
Absolutely.
One of the things that always intrigues me about your blog is that, you seem to, in addition to that, you seem to find lots of really cool little boutique hotels and out of the way spots and off the beaten path kinds of places that sound a whole lot more interesting sometimes than the high end commercial spots.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you mentioning that. It's something I do really enjoy. I mean, I go to meetings sometimes, and somebody will, as a tourism board, we've got this great new Hyatt hotel, and I'm like, no offense to Hyatt or whatever the group, big chain hotel. I'm like, yeah, but what's the big story? If the general manager was a nuclear physicist and then worked his way up from bellman to the general manager of the hotel, yeah, maybe that's a story. Or if there's some particularly unusual restaurant attached to it, yeah, you can write a story about a big fancy hotel. But I generally really like those kind of fun things. We mentioned Newfoundland, and I'm really sad because this woman passed away just a few months ago. But there was a great little, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it, but a great little B&B just outside of St. John's, Newfoundland, that a woman ran. And my wife and I stayed there, I think 2 years ago. And she did like a little Newfoundland introduction. So have you ever heard of these ugly sticks that they have in Newfoundland? They get like a broom handle, and they put like pop bottle tops on it, or beer can top, beer bottle tops, and like a wig sometimes, and makeup on them, and a big rubber boot, and they stomp them on the ground and drink rum and drink beer and go crazy, which is, I think, what they call Tuesday in Newfoundland. But it's a great tradition, and she had us do that like around her living room with these sea shanty songs going on, and then taught us how to cook cod cheeks, and cod cheeks are actually pretty tasty, and how to make lobster and all the rest of this stuff. It was just delightful, and I thought, my God, I could have talked to her all night long. She was engaging, she was funny. We were wearing like giant lobster bibs and bright yellow sou'westers, and probably my favorite story, and the other one is the complete opposite side of Canada. I was in a trip in the Kootenay Rockies, so the other side of Banff, like the BC side of Banff, more or less, a little bit south of there. And I was in, I think, Kimberley, BC, and it's kind of got an old German feel to the town. Some of the structures are kind of that German style, and there's like a thing you put in a toonie, and a little guy is like a cuckoo clock sort of thing that's raised up in the air, and you put in a toonie, and a little guy pops out, and he's got lederhosen and a little accordion, little statue, and German music plays, or Austrian music, and the doors closed, and it's all over with. So I was talking to the tour guide when I was there, and she said, well, the guy who did the yodeling and the accordion for that little $2 thing you just saw, he works in the shop across the street. And I said, was he there now? And she said, yeah. I said, well, let's go, right? So we go in there, and his guy's Adi Unterberger. And Adi is the former accordion champion, or whatever you call it, of Austria from like 1958, a professional yodeler. He's got this little gift shop, and he's got his CDs, and he said, would you like me to sing for you? And I said, damn right I would. Sorry, family entertainment, darn right I would. So he goes in the back room, and he comes out with his little Sound of Music hat with a little feather, and he's got the little vest on, and he proceeds to play the accordion for about, a minute, stops in the middle to yodel, and I'm not going to yodel for you, for about another 30 seconds, goes back and finishes the song on the accordion, and he's just beaming, Peter. He is like, he's got an audience. It's just one guy and a tour guide, but he's got an audience. I'm enjoying it. He's celebrating his craft, something that's very important to him. And it might be the most memorable moment I've had in 12 years as a travel writer. I just love this guy. He was the real thing, and to me, that's worth any hotel, spa, or high-end golf course in the world.
But it's always about the people, right?
It's fantastic. I just love little things like that. You know, you're on a tour, and you know, we were in Ireland like 10 years ago, driving down the road, and I just kind of look over the corner of my eye, and this isn't as nice a story, but I look out of the corner of my eye and I think I really want to drive down that road. My wife's like, yeah, you always say that, but we got to get to the hotel. Yeah, but so the next mile or so later, there's another road, and let's go check it out. So we drive down, and the mist is kind of swirling around, and you know, there's horses in the fields in this small little seaside town, and we pull around the corner, and there's this castle sitting out on a ledge of land off in the sea. And I go over and I take a picture of it, and I go back to my hotel that night. I think it's called Malagmore Castle. And that bay is where Lord Mountbatten was killed by the IRA.
Wow.
So I wouldn't, not like I say, it's not a pleasant story,
Yeah.
but it's an interesting little area. And I never would have known if I hadn't suddenly, you know, some part of me had just said, you know, turn left, you know. So, you know, those are the things, you know, the tourism board doesn't usually point you in the direction of IRA killings. And I understand that, you know, so
Yeah.
it is fun to kind of find those little lesser known places, and you talk with the locals, and, you know, whether it's a market in the Caribbean, as a woman selling nutmeg, or, you know, I like people. I like people that are committed to their craft, whatever it is, whether it's growing nutmeg or playing the accordion or cooking cod cheeks. You know, if I sometimes do little tourism seminars with people, and I say, if you've got someone committed and someone who's really passionate about their craft in a destination, interview them, because you're probably going to come back with the best travel story you ever wrote.
Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned the history, I mean, with Lord Mountbatten and all, and that's always, for me anyway, a high point of any trip I take. I mean,
Is the history?
you know, you can go look at all the bars and spas and hotel rooms you want, but when there's some history attached to it, and history always translates into people, and
Right.
and that's what makes the whole thing interesting.
Well, that's what I always say. You know, I mean, the line that I like to use sometimes when I've talked to either travel writers or tourism folks is, you know, have you ever tried to describe a sunset to someone? And I say, you know, we all take sunset pictures, and they're lovely. Our neighbors get bored of seeing them in our presentations, I guess. But you know, you don't come back from a trip and sit down and say, oh, Peter, you should have seen it. It was pink, and it was blue, and then it was cotton candy, and then it was orange. It's like, no, you don't do that. But you talk about, you do talk about food, don't get me wrong, and you probably talk about a golf course and crazy dog leg and the cliffs and the water and the whole bit. But you know, a lot of the things we talk about when we come back from a trip are people. You know, a great tour guide who's explaining, you know, the fascinating stories of history. Crazy cab driver. You know, there was another woman, and again, I can't remember her name. I was at an art museum in San Antonio. You don't think of San Antonio as being a great art museum city, but it's phenomenal, actually. There's a lot of oil money in San Antonio, and a lot of money generally. And so you know, that led to some really great collections of Chinese art and Roman art. And there was one woman, a docent there, and she was in her 80s, tiny little thing, maybe about 4'8", 4'9", and just funny as all get out, and telling me stories and pointing out sex scenes in the murals on the floor and all of this crazy stuff, and embarrassing the teenagers when they come for her tours. And I'll never forget her either. So, you know, I agree with you. History and you know, passionate tour guides and museum guides can really, really make a big difference in a trip. Far more than, you know, I got a salt scrub spa, and, you know, they were all really nice. Now, that having been said, I was lucky enough to be in Tahiti. Our last trip before we got grounded was to the Four Seasons in Tahiti, Bora Bora. And they went so far as like building a small glass panel below the massage table, so that when you put your head down through the little breathing hole, you could look down and see the fish in the
Very cool.
Yeah, in the water. So that was
Wow.
that was pretty cool. Plus the great treatment and pineapple juice and lime and coconut and all that.
I remember reading that blog actually, because whether it was Bora Bora or there's some other places in Tahiti where the hotel rooms are actually built out over the water, and you go out on a boardwalk, and I thought, I've never been there, but I've always thought that just looks so cool. I'd love to do it sometime.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. And when the first time, I'm lucky enough to go to Tahiti about 10 years ago for the first time. And the real reason that I wanted to go, well, I don't go, but the story that I was doing there, or one of the stories I was doing, was the guys who created the first overwater bungalows. And again, there's a great little history story. And these were three guys, sailors from Southern California, mostly around Newport Beach, I think. And they sailed back and forth to Hawaii, and then Hawaii to Tahiti, and then Tahiti back to LA. They would kind of do that triangle. And they had bought a property, or thinking of buying a property on one of the islands, I think Raiatea. And one of them said one day, well, there's not much land to build on, but if we built these out over the water, how cool would that be? And somebody said, that's a great idea. So the first couple ones were literally like 5 feet off the shore. So it wasn't quite like the ones they have now. And now, of course, they're all over the world. Sandals has them in Jamaica and St. Lucia, Mauritius. You see them, I think, the Maldives, Seychelles. I haven't seen any in Hawaii yet, but there's a few in the Caribbean. And of course, they pretty much began in Tahiti, and there's probably 8 or 10 resorts in Tahiti that have them. And it's an incredible experience. It's very cool. I'm not a big bucket list guy, but if I was talking with someone and they had a bucket list, I would say, yeah, if you can never manage it, that's a very, very cool experience.
Have you kept track of the number of countries you've visited while you've been learning about travel?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably around 50, Peter. I mean, I was kind of stupid when I was travel editor at the Star for 5 years, I guess, 2008 to 2013. I had this weird kind of Puritan Catholic guilt thing going on that I shouldn't really go to all of these crazy destinations, because I would just be taking advantage of the opportunity, and that didn't seem right. And I also thought, okay, like, I'm getting stories offered to me from around the world all the time. I should go to places that Canadians are going to want to talk to me about, and kind of be a bit more of an expert on the places that we want to go. I don't know why I thought this. So 5 years as travel editor at the Toronto Star, with pretty much carte blanche to go anywhere I wanted. I never did a trip to South America. I never did a trip to Africa. Hard life. Anyway, first world problems of epic proportions.
Yeah.
I wish I had. I did get to Chile for a few days and Easter Island a few years ago. So technically I've now been to South America. And we did do a trip with Go Away Travel to South Africa last October. So I finally got those out of the way. But why I didn't do those when I was travel editor at the Star, I have no idea.
Now, you mentioned a bucket list. I assume you have a bucket list of destinations that you'd like to visit?
Yeah, there's a few probably. I mean, I don't sit down and write them all down. Like, here's my big 10. I do love the South Pacific. I love Polynesian culture. The history is not written history so much as oral history, but as someone who enjoys a good story, I one of my favorite things to read about are these ancient voyages, across 2,000 miles of open ocean. They get from Tahiti to Easter Island to the Marquesas to Hawaii, in little 80-foot long outrigger canoes with pigs and chickens and dogs and people and breadfruit and grape bananas and all this stuff, right? It's completely crazy, using nothing but the stars and the shape of the waves, and dead reckoning, because there was no sextants, there was no a way to gauge latitude or longitude really. So I find those stories to be really fascinating. So I would probably say the Marquesas Islands, which are kind of between departed Tahiti, but considerably far north, several hours north, and I believe east. So Herman Melville lived a large part of his life there, wrote about it. Jacques Brel, Paul Gauguin lived a number of years there. There was cannibalism on Marquesas even, I think, 150 years ago. It's obviously not a problem now, but very isolated islands, not really beachy, but just huge, dramatic basalt cliffs just plunging right into this impossibly blue ocean. Love to do that. I'd love to, not really the time necessarily for a cruise, but I'd love to do one to kind of the Baltic states and Scandinavia. It's an expensive place to visit, but on a cruise, they have the advantage of eating your meals on board the ship and not having to spend $8 for a cup of espresso in downtown Stockholm. So I think that'd be a great way to go. Brazil, not right now, again, given the COVID situation. Love to see Brazil. There's an island there. I'm more of a warm weather guy than a cold weather guy. You can see the ukulele behind me, so that's probably a giveaway. There's an island in Brazil called Fernando de Noronha, and forgive me if my Portuguese is wrong. And it just looks like the most beautiful place on earth. Very limited tourism. I think there's only a few people that they allow in at any one time, and only a couple hotels, but it looks brilliant. So that'd be cool. And Buenos Aires, maybe. So yeah, I think some of those places. I'd like to explore a little bit more of Southeast Asia. I really enjoyed India when I was there. Fascinating country. Vietnam was very cool. As somebody who grew up in the States, I found it really fascinating to go to Vietnam and be welcomed with open arms. You'd think there might be a little hostility there given that small thing called the Vietnam War, but I remember talking to one old timer there, and he's like, "Sir," he says, "we've been invaded by China, France, the United States. We just want your money. We don't care." At least he was honest, It was pretty funny. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to wind it up here in a sec,
no
Jim.
It's fun.
One of the things that people ask me, I don't know whether it's because they think I'm getting old or what, but they say, what are you going to do when you retire? And I said, well, most people retire from a job to play more golf and to travel, and I already do that. And so what does a travel writer do if he ever retires, or do you?
I don't. I couldn't retire. Not a chance. I can't see it ever happening. Health reasons, perhaps. The nice thing about this, I thought about doing this job years ago, and it always occurred to me that it'd be a nice thing to do because you can do it as much or a little as you want. So, one of these days we're going to have grandchildren. Actually, probably in November, we hope, for the first one.
Oh, congratulations.
Might spend a bit more time with them, and maybe scale it back a little bit at some point. But for now, I'm happy to do that. The nice thing about this job is, and yours, if obviously running a magazine is a little bit different, but as a freelancer, if I choose to do less freelance travel, I do less freelance travel. I could make it 4 days a week, 3 days a week. I could make it twice a month, once a month, whatever I wanted. So I'm sure at some point I will scale it back. At this point, I'm working, pretty much half-time for Travel Pulse Canada, which covers the travel industry here in Canada and around the world. We've got some other projects coming up that I can't talk about just yet, but that we hope to do. So I'm still pretty busy now, pretty much full-time and most weekends, and I love it. I'm happiest when I come back from an assignment and I've got ideas buzzing around in my head, and I'm remembering that conversation with that family or that barkeeper or the yodeling accordion player from Austria in Kimberley, BC, and those things keep me going, and it's fun. I'm not playing a whole lot of golf lately. It's really been quite a while since I've played a full 18, but I still enjoy it, and I still like writing about golf. So, I was mentioning the course there with Ben Cowan-Dewar and what they're doing down in St. Lucia is going to be absolutely spectacular. Yeah. So if you can picture Cabot Cliffs or Cabot Links, with the tropical setting, I can only imagine what they're going to be doing down in the Caribbean. So that's going to be fun to watch. Yeah,
we're definitely looking forward to that coming on stream.
Doesn't he have a third course they're building in there in Cape Breton as well? I can't remember the name of it.
There's a short course that they're building to go with the cliffs and the links.
Okay, that's smart. So, especially in this day and age, some people don't have the time, or might be a family, maybe young kids, or somebody doesn't hit the ball as much. Older folks that don't want to play a full, full 18 with the wind in their face. I'd love to play that one. That'd be nice.
Yeah. No, I'm a huge fan of short courses. I've written about them extensively, and I'd love to see lots more of them, even in Southern Ontario here.
You keep thinking about
lots of time if you can go out and play in an hour and a half or something like that. That's an ideal way to play a little golf and get some fresh air. So
perfect.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, thanks very much for being my guest today.
My pleasure. It's always.
Just if anybody is interested, and hopefully you are, it's jimbyerstravel.com. Great website. Subscribe to his newsletter. There's lots of good information coming out daily. And Jim,
some of it's even true.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Thanks again for being with us.
My pleasure.
Bye now.
Thanks. Take care. All the best.